Man, after watching that, I feel like we need to go to the club and start dancing. Don't you guys? I mean, that was dance music right there. Anyways, hey guys, it is great to be with you. And I want to start our time with asking you guys to think about a statement. And this is a statement that I think all of us have either said, we've thought about, or we've heard somebody say. And the statement I want us to think about is, we've heard this. Someone say, in my lifetime. In my lifetime. For example, perhaps you've heard someone say, man, in my lifetime, I never thought a man would step on the moon. But in July, or on July 20th of 1969, a man stepped on the moon. Or perhaps you've heard someone say, man, in my lifetime, I never thought we would have a self-driving, self-parking car that runs not on this fuel, but on this invisible thing called electricity. But here we are today, we have the Tesla. And Elon, he's in Austin, Texas. He's made Austin his headquarters, and he loves this city, and I love him being here. It's amazing. But you've heard things like this said, is my point. And perhaps you've said these things. In fact, as I think about, my life and, times that I've made this statement, something I've said, and maybe you've heard me say this before, certainly I've said this with quite a few people, is I've said, in my lifetime, I never thought Jill and I would have 5 boys. We never planned this. In fact, I make fun of big families, but my buddy Norcross, I'm always like, man, you have so many kids. He's like, Buck, do you know you have a lot of kids too? And I'm like, yeah, I know. But anyways, there's my boys. They're Hawaiian themed for Easter last week. That was Jill. She loves to do that stuff. But I never thought we would have 5 boys. But here we are. Today we have 5 boys. In fact, something else I never thought would happen in my life, that I never thought in my lifetime that I would actually drive one of these things, a minivan. And I actually drove a minivan. In fact, when my first son, Sam, was born, I went to the Mazda dealer and bought a Mazda MPV. And I remember when I got in the car, it's brand new, and I'm driving it home, I'm thinking to myself, what have I done? What have I done? And then I pull up to a stoplight, and I remember there's these 2 guys about my age. Their hats are on backwards. They're in a BMW convertible. They're blaring their music. The guy looks at me, and he gives me one of those sympathetic kind of man, like, I see you, man. I'm hurting for you. And I'm saying, I felt it. And then about a year later, I sold it because I just couldn't drive a minivan, and we got to use Suburban. Now, here's the point. If you drive a minivan, you are a far better man than me. You really are. You're far healthier. You have less pride. You're far more self-aware. And so kudos to you. I'm just like, for real, kudos. It's just, I'm still struggling with a lot of things. Anyways, my point is, I think we've all said this statement, man, in my lifetime, I've never seen something like this. And on a serious note, for me personally, something I've just said to, some friends, something I've thought out, in my mind quite a bit, is this statement that I've said, in my lifetime, I have never seen us as a culture more divided. I've never seen us this divided. Now, keep in context, I'm 46 years old. This is my lifetime. But in my lifetime, I have never been aware of a moment in history that we have been this divided as a culture. When I begin to think about politics and everything that's going on in the political world, I mean, somebody saying, hey, you voted for Biden. You voted for Trump. And as a result of voting for Trump or voting for Biden, like I can just say you're no longer my friend. I can say I want nothing to do with you. I can say that you're less than a person because of what you've done. Like you're terrible. You're evil because of your political ideology or political thoughts. I know politics can divide us and all that kind of stuff, and that's been the case throughout the years. But today, I've never seen us this politically divided and being this polarized. And not only that, but when it comes to war. I mean, you think about the last 20 years or 20 plus years, and I mean, when it comes to the Iraq war, when it comes to what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening with Israel and Palestine, what's happening all around the world. I mean, their temperatures are so high and so many different opinions. There's so much division. And then, of course, you have immigration. And should we build the wall? Should we not build the wall? Should we adhere to our laws? Should we not adhere to our laws? I mean, all these kind of things. In fact, my youngest son, he came home the other day, and he said, Dad, in school, in class, somebody stood up, and she said, I'm an immigrant, and as an immigrant, I love these presidents. I think they're the best individuals who've ever been president because of the benefit for my family and the benefit for me. And as she was speaking, somebody else stood up and said, how can you say that? Those are terrible presidents. And this is the right president. And we have laws and there's a way to get in this country. And my son came home and he's like, Dad, I'm in 7th grade. And we're having these kind of conversations. And I said, son, I know. I've just never seen us this divided. And then you think about racial tensions. I mean, I know that there are people older than me who've experienced more tensions perhaps. I'm just saying in my lifetime. I mean, is it Black Lives Matter? Is it Blue Lives Matter? Is it police brutality? Should we defund the police? Should we add more money and increase the police? I mean, I've just never seen us this divided. And then, of course, you have sexuality. And then you have camps on both sides, and everybody's got an opinion, and here's what love means. And all the while in the division, there's so much hurt. There's so much pain. There's so much confusion as a result. And then you've got arguments like pro-life or pro-choice. Where do you stand? And everybody has their opinion, and man, it just feels more and more polarized. And then, of course, you have free speech. Free speech, again, in my lifetime, I have never seen the assault on free speech as I do today. That if you say something scientific, objective, and factual, that you can be canceled, that you can be ostracized, that you can be fired, that you can even be assaulted, physically assaulted because of something you said that goes against the grain. And then, with COVID, I don't think I have to explain masks or vaccines. Families have broken up over face coverings. Friendships have broken up. In the church, I have personally felt this. What position are you, over here or over here? And there's such division, such angst, so much emotion. And when you just look at culture, and this is not an exhaustive list, but if you just look at culture, you're like, wow, we are extraordinarily divided, and it feels like everything is colliding. But then you think to yourself, maybe if we go to faith, maybe faith is the place that we're going to find some unity in our way forward. But then you go to faith, and who's right? What's true? Is it Buddha? Is it Muhammad? Is it nothing and it's just the universe and we should thank the universe? Or is it Jesus? Who's right? There's so many different thoughts and division within that. And then you have faith, people within faith. There's so many, aspects or sects of these different faiths. And you're like, wow, so much division. And then if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you think about the Big C church, right? And you look at what's going on in the Big C church with all the scandals, with the abuse of children, all the moral failure with people who are supposed to be leading and modeling what it looks like to follow Christ. And you just kind of step back and you're like, yeah, and culture's certainly divided. In my lifetime, I've never seen us more divided. But when it comes to church, in my lifetime, I've never seen the church more divided. Especially when it comes to theological and doctrinal issues and all the changes that are happening within the churches and movement. You're just kind of like, and all these camps being built, just like, man, there's division everywhere. And everything feels like it's colliding. In culture and faith, culture's colliding with faith, faith is colliding with culture, and you just have this angst and this tension to go, man, it is so incredibly divided. And do you know what adds fuel to the fire? Do you know what's like a catalyst to this division? It's the thing I see all the time. Social media. And I'm not here to be, the old preacher on the stage to go, oh, social media is bad. And, my kids think I am. They're like, Dad, stop with the social media, limiting my time. Social media, there's wonderful things about it. And there's, we're more connected and so many amazing things. But you have to know, the majority of your influences on social media, if you subscribe to accounts, those accounts, they're not even real. And they're just antagonizing. In fact, according to MIT Technology, and this is something I just learned over the last few years, look at this. This is amazing to think about, and you should know this. You should know this. In 2019, 19 of Facebook's top 20 pages for American Christians were run by Eastern European troll farms overseas. They're not even real. And this goes not only for Christianity, but pick whatever religion you want to pick whatever side, either the left or the right you want to pick whatever position you want to pick on any kind of social issue. It's the case across the board. And guess what the number one agenda of these accounts are? Division, to fire up the sides, to create more of this animosity, to make us more polarized as a culture. You just need to know what's actually going on social media. So the question becomes, all right, with all the division and everything colliding, what do we do? What's our way forward? Should I get up here in front of you and should I begin to expound and deconstruct truth and show you what's true and empower you to get on the streets and be like this fella? Be a street preacher? And now we just stand up for our rights, stand up for what's true? I think if some of you, if you're honest, for those of you watching, you would go, that's exactly what I want you to do, Buck. But come on. Let's just be fairly objective about this. Let's be intellectually honest about this. Isn't this what the church, the Big C church, has done for 50, 60, 70 years? We've had the far majority. And what has it netted us doing this? Well, I'll tell you what it's netted us. We've made a ton of points. The church is renowned to make points, but we've made no difference. In fact, let me correct myself. We've actually made a profound difference, but a profound negative difference. If you look at the research I look at, which, in my world, this is what I do. I know you've got jobs and raising kids and thinking about bills and all this but I geek out on this kind of stuff. Since the year 2000, people are leaving the church in the millions because we've made a point for a long, long time, but we've made little to no difference. So we can't do that. What can we do? What can we do when faith and culture are all colliding? And when culture collides with faith and faith collides with culture? Well, guys, what I would at least put before you is I want us to follow in the steps of Jesus Christ. Because what was so cool, one of the things about Jesus, when you read about what he did, and in his culture, in the first century culture, goodness, was their division, unbelievable division. And in his culture, instead of empowering the 12 guys to stand up and fight for what's right and get on the streets and tell the culture how they're wrong and how we're right, no, Jesus was renowned for this. Jesus often functioned in such a paradoxical way where he's like, let's not do what everybody else is. I want you to understand something over here. Because if we can understand this over here, it's actually our way forward. So guys, listen. Over the next several weeks, I'm not going to stand up in front of you as a pundit and give you ammunition for the left or ammunition for the right. That's not what I'm going to do. Over the next several weeks, I simply want to be your pastor. And as your pastor, I want to lead you to some deeper understanding and deeper truths that I think are our way forward. I want us to understand at a much deeper level what's going on? What's happening? To create a baseline, I think we need that foundation to start with. And over the next several weeks, I want to create a deeper understanding for all of us and lead us to a better place of understanding what's going on here and right here. Because if we can get a deeper understanding of these things, it is our way forward. It does provide a lot of clarity. If we can get a deeper understanding, it allows you not to inadvertently participate in the division. Or perhaps if you have kids, not to empower your kids to inadvertently participate in the division. And if you and I can just reason together, if we can just think together, be honest together, if we can do this over the next few weeks, I actually think this is our way forward to what Jesus called us to a place what Jesus said, in the midst of the division, you can experience peace, rest, that there is something you and I can do to not continue the division and take a stand and tell everybody how they're wrong. There is actually something we can do to move us to a place to thrive, to move us to a place to perhaps unite and not divide. So that's where we're going over the next several weeks. Now today, it's really important you hear me. Today, I am simply laying a foundation. Today, what we're going to talk about is going to feel like chapter 1 of a book. You know, when you read a book, it kind of creates the tension and it creates, a little bit of the conflict and what is. And then you're like, but I have a million questions. That's wonderful. And you will walk out of here today with a million questions about, well, what do we do about this and all that kind of stuff. And that's completely fine. I want you guys to know that on the front end. And those questions you have, we're going to answer a lot of those questions in the coming weeks. But today, it's like chapter 1. It's like sitting in a movie and you watch the first part of the movie and you're like, what's going to happen? That's where we're going through the rest of the series. But today, I want us to answer the question and get a deeper understanding on what is. What's happening? What's going on? What sociologically is taking place to create this enormous amount of division? So the first observation I want us to think about, and to just make this, just as a data point, is if you're a follower of Christ, this is really interesting. If you're not a follower of Christ, I think it's equally interesting, is we need to know this. In our culture, followers of Christ have moved from the majority to the minority. That is a huge tectonic shift in our culture that has taken place. According to the latest research with Barna, Barna says 49% of millennials and 65% of Americans would consider themselves followers of Jesus, Christians. Now, what's really important about that is what they're talking about is Christian in name only, not in practice. It's just saying, hey, we're doing the research, and if you had to identify, how would you identify? Well, 65% would say, hey, I'm a Christian. But in terms of actually practicing it, living out the principles of Christ, following the footsteps of Christ, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I would just identify as a Christian. It's important to understand that. And then they go into deeper research and look at what they discover. Look at this. Young adults who are resilient followers of Christ, take Jesus seriously, are at about 10%. And in Austin, Texas, or greater Austin, I guarantee it's less than 10%. And this is important to understand. And the reason why it's important to understand is because this means that as a church, as the church, kind of big C church, on a national level, that we are no longer the majority, and we are not an ethnic minority, and that's really important to point out, but we are what sociologists would call a cognitive minority, that we have moved to this new sociological place. And as the cognitive minority, it's these ideas of following Jesus, these principles of following Jesus, this morality of following Jesus is now more at odds than ever before with the host culture. And Christianity is no longer the host culture. There was a day when Christianity was the host culture. I remember about 15, 20 years ago, I went on vacation with my mom, my dad, and my sister. And if you ever go on vacation with my mom and dad and sister, you need to know two things. Number one is there is no rest. You're going to be exhausted. And number two, you're going to see everything there is to see wherever we're vacationing. Those are the two things that are always true. And I remember about 15 years ago, Jill and I are in D.C., and my sister has an agenda, like second by second, be at this intersection at this time because it gives us enough time to get to this memorial, right? And we saw pretty much everything there is to see in D.C., the Supreme Court, the White House, Jefferson's Memorial, Lincoln's Memorial. Everything you can imagine we saw. And I'm telling you, one of the biggest observations that I took away, that I stepped back and went, wow, that the Bible and Scripture is absolutely everywhere. All of their speeches and famous words are filled with Jesus and Christ and a Creator. There's all kinds of scriptures quoted exactly from the Bible that are inscribed in all of these memorials and all of these symbols all throughout Washington, D.C. I mean, you can't get away from it. I mean, if you just go there objectively and you're like, hey, I just want to look. I just want to make observations. You're like, wow. I mean, these people clearly follow Jesus and clearly love God. And if you look at the framing of our nation, I mean, there were certainly some secular thinkers. That's absolutely true. But the far majority were followers of Jesus Christ. I mean, you may not know this, but the majority, if not all, Ivy League schools today, did you know why they were started? They were started to train pastors with theology and doctrine and how to be prepared to go be a pastor. That's why those universities began. I mean, there was a day the church and the Bible and pastors, there was reverence, there was honor. But guys, let's be honest. Those days are long gone, and we are no longer the host culture. That as followers of Jesus Christ, if you are, that we are the cognitive minority, which means every day there feels like from the left and from the right, it feels like this pressure to assimilate, to just do what everyone else feels like is doing. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a mom, and she was telling me about her son and what's going on with her son, and it's really, really hard stuff. And we began talking about the relationship and how to fight for relationship and practically what does that look like, and we began talking about Jesus and what he taught about this whole thing. And she looked at me and she said, Buck, I mean, I think those are good things, but I'm just telling you, it would be so much easier to give in. It would be so much easier just to do what everybody else is doing. And I looked at her and I said, I know. There are days I feel like I'm crazy to believe what I believe. There are days to follow Jesus and to take his principles and his teachings that feel like, man, is this okay? I mean, it just feels like I'm the only one who believes this. That is a really important sociological observation for you and I to lay in our foundation. That in terms of followers of Jesus Christ, or if you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, you should know this, that we have moved to the cognitive minority. The second observation is equally as important. And this observation has to do with this one individual right here. And this guy is Friedrich Nietzsche. And if you don't know who Nietzsche is a German philosopher. He's born in the mid-1800s. He's born in a home of a pastor. His dad was a pastor. His grandfather was a pastor. And then at the age of 4, his dad died, and he grew up in a very traumatic home. And as he grew up, he became one of the world's renowned philosophers. I mean, he's a brilliant, brilliant thinker if you've read his writings, if you've read his books. And in Nietzsche, he was the one who's famous to coin the phrase that God is dead. That God is dead. With enlightenment and with science, we have eliminated the possibility of God. We don't need God. Now, if you read his writings in context, and if you read his contemporary philosophers' writings in context, there was a major, major concern with Nietzsche and his contemporaries. And the major concern was to go, okay, if we remove God, what do we replace God with? In other words, you need to know this. This is really important. When you walk away from something, you're not free. You're not liberated. We think that all the time. You're always walking towards something else. You need to know what you're walking towards. So he was saying, hey, if my big concern with this notion I just put forth, God is dead, if we walk away from that, what are we going to walk into? His fear was on this side. His contemporary, philosophers, their fear was with what's going to happen over here. So I want to illustrate it. I want to show you what they were talking about. And so I need you to take one more sip of coffee real quick, because this is going to cause us to think, right? So take a sip of coffee, get some caffeine, and here we go. Let me illustrate this. Think about this. See, in the beginning, there was God. In the beginning, God is the creator. In the beginning, God is foundational. In the beginning, God is a good father. Jesus told us who God is. He is your father, and he's a good, loving father. And in the beginning, as what's foundational and as a creator and as a good father, he gave you and me. He gave you worth, you value, you meaning and purpose. He gave us beauty. He gave us the ability to love. He gave us the ability to reason together. He gave us intellect. He gave us so many things. He gave you an identity. All of that is intrinsic, which means, and this is really important, you don't have to work for it. You don't have to go be successful at your job. You don't have to have a bunch of money. You don't have to have all these accomplishments. You don't have to have big muscles. No. You already have intrinsic worth and value. The reason why is because God is foundational. He is the foundation which gives you objective worth, objective value, objective identity, and objective meaning. It's all objective because of God. Not only do we have God foundationally, not only do you have intrinsic worth and value, but then we have the we. And what's so cool about humanity, what makes you human and not an animal, is you have the ability to put bets in the future. You have the ability to take ideas and reason, look at the past, look at the current, and we have the ability to put out a bet on the future to go, I'm going to imagine that the future is going to be this way. If we can all reason together, I think this is a better future. That is the thing that makes us so distinct from any other animal. And God gave us the ability to reason together. Now, this structure right here with we, you, and God, really important. Because what this means is we can disagree. We can reason together. We can have ideas. You can have ideas. And your ideas, may be completely different than mine. But I'm going to give you autonomy. I'm going to give you your prerogative, which means you can think what you want to think. But I'm not going to cancel you. I'm not going to not be your friend. Why? Because you have value. You have intrinsic worth and value. You have intrinsic meaning. You have an intrinsic identity. And I dare not violate that. And the reason why I dare not violate that and why I need to stay curious on the other side of you is because I will be accountable to God. And God is your Father. And He gave you intrinsic value and worth. And we may have different ideas that we're projecting on the future differently about. But I'm not going to cancel you, assault you, hurt you, think of you less than human. Because foundationally, you have immense worth, value, and meaning. That's been our framework. But in the late 90s, 1880s, Friedrich Nietzsche put forth this idea. God is dead. We don't need him. We're enlightened. Our IQs are higher today than they've ever been before, which, by the way, is not true. Just do a little bit of research, right? It is. It was put forth. It's an idea that's been totally debunked, right? But this is the idea. Science has replaced God. Enlightenment has replaced God. And in the 20th and 21st century, we have fully embraced this. And Nietzsche said, if you embrace this, I am concerned with what will happen. And what he was concerned with is this, is that now that you remove God foundational, now that you remove God as a father, you no longer objectively have that intrinsic value and worth. I don't know what your value is. Again, you have to use your mind. Objectively speaking, there is nothing to substantiate your worth, your significance, your value, your meaning, and your identity. There is nothing to substantiate your random time and chance. That's all you are. That you should look at your son and daughter. You emotionally can substantiate it, but that's it. That's subjective. Objectively, you can't look at your son and daughter, say, sweetie, you have so much value, that there's a plan for your life. There's absolutely nothing. And you can't affirm objectively someone's identity, which means you remove God. Every day you got to figure this out. Who are you? What is your identity? Well, you got to base it on your feelings. Base it whatever you feel today. Follow your heart. That's the best advice we can give. Because whatever you feel, whatever you desire, whatever your heart is, that's what you have to feel. And if you don't feel value, if you don't feel worth, if you don't feel meaning, then you got to go look for it. You got to go find it. You got to go achieve. You got to go work harder. You got to go, do things to your body. You got to do whatever because you have no value. And the biggest concern Nietzsche and his contemporaries had was this, is if you follow this path, which he was proposing, it ultimately leads to nihilism. Nihilism is the rejection of all religious and moral principles and the belief that life is meaningless. There is no purpose that you can objectively substantiate in your life. And that has huge ramifications to our culture. Because now that you have been removed, you have no value, you have no objective worth, then all we're left with is what? We, the majority. the narrative of the we, and we reason together. We use ideas. We project on the future. And if you don't agree with my bet on the future, our best way forward, then I can cancel you. I can be derogatory. I can post things on social media about you. I can treat you less than human because you aren't even human in my eyes. In fact, you are far less than human, which means I can assault you, which means I can even, if I so choose and desire, take your life. Because why not take your life? Your ideas are competing with my identity, my meaning, my future, my value. You are a threat to me, and you're not even human. So you need to go away by any means necessary. That's what Nietzsche and his contemporaries knew was our future if we take away God. And today, if you look objectively at the 21st century, more blood has been shed in the 21st century in the name of no God than all religions and all the centuries previously put together. We must understand when we walk away from something, we are always walking towards something else. That's a huge sociological shift in our culture. The third and final is that when there's the minority, cognitive minority, and there's the adoption and embracing God is dead, then you feel that. And again, this regardless if you're a Christian or not, you feel that daily pressure. That just kind of, it feels like gravity. You can't quite quantify it, but man, and all of a sudden, because of this pressure every single day to assimilate into these new ideas, into the big we, all of a sudden it feels emotionally exhausted. You feel emotionally exhausted or spiritually depleted. You feel overwhelmed. You feel like, man, I'm getting home every day and I am done, right? And here's the thing. For the far majority of us, your life is amazing. My life is amazing on paper. And I want to say, not everybody, if you put your life on paper, this is not everybody, but I'm talking about probably 99% of us. If we just started writing down the things of life, we would go, man, every day I should thank God because my life is amazing. I mean, I've been married to Jill 23 years, and when I look at her, my eyes still flutter. I mean, she still does it for me. She's amazing. I'm so grateful. I mean, together on paper, we have 5 boys, and yes, parenting is really hard. But they're amazing. 5 boys having the relationships. I mean, and together we bought a house 10 years ago before the market just whoo, right? And so we look at our house and our cars and what we have, and on paper, we're looking at that going, man, we're sure lucky. Our life is amazing. On paper, we live, or in reality too, we live in Austin. I mean, Austin is one of the most special places on the entire planet. It is such a remarkable place. And we live in the state of Texas, which is one of the greatest states you can live in. I mean, in Texas, Blue Bell cookies and cream ice cream is manufactured. I mean, that is one of those moments to get really religious and say, praise Jesus, I live in Texas, right? Because of the ice cream, right? But, I put that on paper. And on paper, I can go to Georgetown Square with Jill. We can get a glass of wine at Grape Creek, walk around the square, have the cool breeze, see all the people, and I'm like, man, my life is so good. And yes, there's been trauma. Yes, there's been tragedy, but man, every day I should wake up and thank God. But why is it after a glass of wine at Georgetown Square, I get in my car and I get that text from my kids, and I'm like, oh, or I get a text from work. And the nature of my role as a pastor, man, here's another thing. Or I get on the news and all of a sudden, in a moment, I feel the pressure. In a moment, I feel overwhelmed. Guys, that's true regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not. So my question is, why do we feel so tired and worn down? Why is that? And why do we feel so battered and bruised? And when we come home after a hard day's work, we just want to grab a beer or a couple beers or a lot of beers and just veg out on the TV and numb out? Or if you want to cope differently, you want to control everything. And if I can control my kids, control the environment, control everything, we're still dealing with the same root issue. And we just feel so, I'm exhausted. Your life is so good though. Why is that? And if you're a follower of Jesus, why does every day feel like a battle just to stay faithful and keep following Jesus? It would be so much easier just to assimilate and give in. Why is all of this happening? Well, what's amazing, Jesus 2,000 years ago leaned in and gave us an answer to the question. That in John chapter 16, Jesus was talking to the 12 guys, his closest followers. And this was one of those moments of rarity that he was so clear. Typically he would preach or teach in a parable, or he'd talk about doctrine or theological things, and his guys were, okay, let me try to follow that again. In this moment, this was such a cool moment. Jesus was so crystal clear. In fact, his followers looked at him and said, Jesus, you are being so clear right now. And he said, I know. I'm trying to help you. And he says, guys, I'm going away in John 16. He says, when I go away, there's going to be all kinds of grief. It's going to be extraordinarily difficult. You need to know that. And then he says this in John 16, to you, to me, and to them. He says, guys, you need to know, because I'm your friend, because I so love you. In this world, you will have trouble. That this is a daily thing. And this is not possibly you're going to have trouble. You know, there's a probability of trouble if you're not responsible and you don't work hard, you know. No. Jesus was saying, let me be so clear. In all capital letters, every day of your life, you need to know you will have trouble. That what you're feeling, that pressure, oh man, that's real. That every day when you can look at your life on paper and you're like, my life is so good. Why do I just want to come home and drink? Why do I want to come home and veg out? Why do I keep giving in to the things that I know are hurting me? What's that all about? Yeah, Jesus says, guys, in this world, you will have trouble. And then all throughout the New Testament, this theme of what Jesus laid as foundational of what is. I mean, you see it everywhere. The Apostle Paul, the first century follower of Jesus, he's arrested in Rome. He knew within a few days to a few weeks, he didn't know the exact time, but he was about to be martyred, executed. He knew it. It was coming. So he writes a letter to his young protege named Timothy, who was a pastor of a very large church in Ephesus. And here's what he says to Timothy. He says, Timothy, look at this language, the way he writes. I have fought the good fight as I think about my life. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. So Paul, when you think about life, you feel like life is a fight, like a daily fight. That's the pressure you feel. That's what it feels like. That's reality. Paul says, of course, that's the reality. And then he writes the letter to Timothy. And he directs his attention to Timothy. And he says this to Timothy, young Timothy. Fight the good fight, Timothy, for the true faith. Hold tightly to the eternal life to which God has called you, which you have declared so well before many witnesses. In other words, Timothy, you know this. You know Jesus said this is not our home. That we're exiles, we're ambassadors, that our home is the home to come in heaven. That's where every tear will be wiped away. But in this life, Timothy, hold on to that. That's going to give you hope. Teach that as a pastor. But you need to know, every day you got to fight the good fight, because that's the reality. That's what is. That's what life is like, a fight. And then Paul goes on and look at this language. I love what he says here. He says, for we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies. This is so critical in this discussion, that Paul's saying, don't you dare think Trump is your enemy. He's not your enemy. Don't you dare think Biden is your enemy. Don't you dare think your father or your neighbor or your boss or that guy at school. I mean, you're setting yourself up for more and more division, and you think our battle is against them. And if you're a follower of Christ, man, you got to lean into this stuff. Why are we putting bumper stickers and flags, saying these terrible things about our leaders and saying, they're the enemy, they're the enemy? Are you kidding me? Paul was so clear. They are not your enemy. You're fighting them, but you're fighting the wrong fight. Well, Paul, what's the fight we should fight? He says, I'll tell you. He says, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against the mighty powers in the dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Which you read that and you want to go, come again? What are you saying here, Paul? What he's saying is so helpful and practical, and we're going to unpack this next week. And this will lay such a strong foundation for you and for me. But for today's discussion, he goes, man, your battle's not against who you think it is. But it is a battle, doesn't it? Feels like a battle. And then he goes on and he says this. He goes, therefore, put on the full armor of God. Look at the language he uses to describe life, everyday life. Like as a soldier fighting a war. That's what life is like. So put on the full armor. And then he says the weapons, look at this. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world, Paul, you're talking about like these metaphors, these illustrations, they're so like warlike, they're so bad. I don't like that. And he goes, you may not like it. I'm just trying to describe what everyday life feels like. It feels like a battle, like a war. And then I love what he says, and this is the last one. He says, we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. The original language here is this idea to say, there is an enemy who's looking to kill you in war. You got to take that enemy captive. And you look at this and you go, Paul, that is strong. He's like, I know. That is what everyday life is like. So the question, back to you, back to me. Why is my mind under so much duress? Regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not, that's a reality. Why? Or why do I feel inflicted by the ideologies of our time? I mean, they keep changing and changing and changing. Hey, I adopted them 10 years ago or 20, but now it's so why? What's that all about? And why do I feel this tug of war of desires in my own chest? I mean, I know what Jesus has said. This actually makes life far better. Why do I keep going back? What's that about? And why do I keep coming back to the self-defeating behaviors? And why is there a steady stream of bad news from across the world? Every time I turn on the news, it's not like a steady week of just wonderful awesomeness. It's just bad news. And why does injustices rage when so many of us decry it as evil? And why can't we seem to fix the world's deepest problems, even with all of the money and technology and political prowess? And why does it weigh on me so heavily on a daily basis? Why is there so much division? Why does everything feel like it's colliding? Jesus, who gave his life for you, who undeniably loves you, says, as your friend, as your Savior, I'm trying to help you with what is. And what is every day is you will have trouble. That's what is. And that is important for us to begin this discussion with because of this statement. That your level of disappointment is directly proportional to your level of expectation. You see, if perhaps you wake up every day thinking this is utopia, or perhaps you grew up in a religious influence that said God's going to prosper you, God's going to bless you, God's going to bless your business, God's going to fill your bank account, God's never going to heal you from your cancer, God's not going to let any trauma happen to you because no good God would ever do that, then every day of your life, you're going to wake up feeling this pressure in an inordinate way. It's going to be a massive burden and disappointment. But this is not a popular verse to get a tattoo of or to put on your phone or your bathroom mirror, but maybe if you did and said, no, I'm going to go ahead and change and embrace what Jesus taught. That in this world, I will have trouble. That's the reality. It's like a battle. It's like a fight. Then when you wake up, you are in a posture for more joy, for more gratefulness, and thankfulness for all the things that you have in this life. I'll end with this. You see, that's not where we land the plane. It's not like, okay, that's pretty depressing. Let's pray. No, John 16, Jesus gave context. He's telling the guys, hey, I'm going away. One day we will see one another. But in the meantime, there will be grief. And then he says these words, I've told you these things, guys, so that in me you may have peace. Yeah, there's trouble in the world, but there is a way to have peace. And then he says, yeah, in this world you'll have trouble, but take heart, you can persevere. You can move to a place, not of simply surviving and every day it feels like a doomsday, but you can move to a place of rest, a place of peace, a place of actually thriving in the world, even though there is trouble. Where's that, Jesus? Well, it's in me. I've overcome the world. Well, how do we experience that? How do we take a step into that? What do I need to know? Because I want to experience that because I feel the reality of the division in our culture and in our faith. Well, that's what we're going to address next week, and we'll answer those questions. But for today, let's pray. God, thank you that we can think of such things and that you've preserved the scriptures to remind us of what is. God, I know there's a million questions and a million probably different opinions and thoughts. And I just know you're big enough to handle all that. You know our hearts. You know our minds. So, Father, would you meet us in this conversation? Would you meet us in this series in the next few weeks and lead us to a place of genuine, authentic peace, and lead us to a place not to divide, but to unite us. God, I trust you with that in Jesus' name. Amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.